the growl of diesel engines rumbling down my street at 7 M wasn't anything unusual for our coastal neighborhood. What was unusual, though, was seeing two enormous tow trucks crawling straight into my driveway. Their operators already unloading chains, hooks, and wheel lifts like they were preparing for a battlefield extraction. I set my coffee down on the porch rail, adjusted the sweatshirt that read Coast Guard Veteran, and walked outside to find three men circling my covered patrol vessel, like scavengers eyeing a fresh carcass. "Morning, gentlemen," I said, keeping my tone steady, even though irritation was already tightening in my chest. "Mind telling me why you're on my property?" The lead driver, a burly guy whose coveralls looked permanently dyed with engine grease, didn't even bother granting me a full glance. "Got orders from the HOA to remove this abandoned boat," he said flatly. "Paperwork says it's been sitting here more than 30 days, without movement." Almost laughed out loud. Abandon the vessel? Sitting beneath that custom marine cover was a 28-foot Coast Guard response boat, assigned to me for routine maintenance and inspection. It had been in my driveway for exactly 12 days, and every inch of it was federally owned equipment. "I'd suggest you stop what you're doing and leave immediately," I told them, pulling out my phone. "That boat belongs to the United States Coast Guard, and I've got the documentation to prove it." The driver shrugged, like this was just another Tuesday, not my problem. "HOA president says it goes, you want to argue?" Take it up with her. That was the moment I hit record and dialed a number I hoped I'd never have to use in this neighborhood. Within minutes, 3 black SUVs with government plates came tearing around the corner like a storm front suddenly. Those tow truck drivers didn't look nearly as confident. "My name is Arthur Mitchell, and I've served in the Coast Guard for 15 years. 6 months ago, I moved into this quiet community in Cedar Ridge Estates, drawn by the water access and the promise of a peaceful residential area. What I hadn't realized was that 3 months before I arrived, the neighborhood had elected a new HOA president named Brenda Kensington, a woman who apparently believed her position was a divine mandate to micromanage every driveway, lawn, and mailbox within a 5-block radius. The trouble started the moment I brought the patrol boat home. As part of my duties overseeing fleet maintenance for the district, I occasionally needed to store vessels at authorized locations for inspections or minor repairs. My property had been vetted and approved by the Coast Guard, complete with security standards and federal permission. I even went the extra mile introducing myself to the neighbors, explaining why the vessel would be there, and assuring everyone it was temporary. Most people were fascinated. The Hendersons next door brought their grandkids over to admire it. Old Mr. Sterling, a Navy vet, himself saluted it on his morning walk. But Brenda saw it as an affront to her perfectly curated suburban kingdom, and I saw a violation, and worst of all, something she didn't personally approve. The first notice appeared on my door 3 days after the boat arrived, written in Comic Sans, laminated for reasons still unknown to mankind. It claimed my vessel violated HOA by laws on recreational vehicles, watercraft, and commercial equipment. I responded politely, sending her copies of my federal authorization and explaining that the vessel was government property, not a recreational boat, and that federal law superseded HOA regulations. Her reply came the next day via certified mail. She dismissed my so-called federal papers, insisting HOA rules were supreme inside the community. It was painfully obvious. She'd never heard of the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution, but I tried to be diplomatic. I invited her to inspect a vessel in person, see the Coast Guard markings, and review the documentation. She showed up that evening with 2 board members, a clipboard, and the smuggest look I have ever seen on a human being. She was exactly as you'd imagine, middle-aged, sporting an asymmetrical haircut that probably cost more than my monthly marine maintenance budget, and wearing an outfit that screamed, "I demand to speak to your manager from across the neighborhood." "Mr. Mitchell," she said, pronouncing my name like it physically hurt. "I don't care if this boat belongs to the Queen of England. It's an eyesore slowing property values. It needs to go. I walked her around the vessel, pointing out the Coast Guard insignia, federal property placards, and registration numbers. I showed her the maintenance log, the security requirements, and even a letter from my commanding officer, approving temporary storage. She took photos of everything, but not to understand any of it. No, she was building what she probably thought was an ironclad case. This is clearly a commercial vehicle, she announced, ignoring the massive U.S. Coast Guard lettering on the hull, and that tarp not in horror-approved color. It needs to be navy blue or forest green. Not gray, it's a military-grade weather cover. I replied calmly. It protects sensitive equipment. Then it should be stored on a military base, not in our peaceful neighborhood, she snapped. You have 7 days to remove it or you'll be fined $50 a day, ma'am, with all due respect. I said you can't fine me for storing federally owned equipment. I'm legally authorized to maintain. This isn't my boat, it's your country's boat. The same Coast Guard vessel that protects these waters and responds to emergencies. She actually snorted. The HOA protects this neighborhood. Mr. Mitchell, not your little boat club. 7 days after she left, I immediately contacted our legal affairs office. They confirmed I was fully within my rights and even offered to send an official letter explaining the situation. I thought that would end it. But I vastly underestimated Brenda, Kensington's mix of stubbornness and ignorance. The fines begin exactly 7 days later. 50 a day right on schedule. Then she got creative. I suddenly violated noise ordinances, despite the boat not having made a single sound. My driveway, supposedly, exceeded the maximum coverage allowed for recreational vehicles. Never mind that this wasn't one. She even claimed the height of the boat's cover violated airspace restrictions, which I'm fairly certain she invented that same morning. By the end of week 2, she claimed I owed over $2,000 in HOA fines. She mailed copies to every resident, trying to stir the neighborhood against me. She posted pictures on the community Facebook page with captions like, "Is this the neighborhood we want?" and "Commercial vehicles destroy property values." Most neighbors weren't buying it. Several neighbors even volunteered to speak on my behalf at the next HOA meeting. But Brenda had already stacked the board with loyalists, and she ran every agenda like a dictator at a microphone. She scheduled a special session solely to address the boat problem, as she dramatically labeled it. I showed up that night with a folder full of documentation and a Coast Guard legal representative who'd driven down specifically to deal with this escalating circus. LT Commander Sarah Lawson was a no-nonsense officer who had handled civilian interference cases before. During the public comment period, she straightened her uniform and delivered the facts with a kind of authority that could stop a moving freight train. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice carrying the weight of federal law. Petty Officer Mitchell is conducting authorized maintenance on a Coast Guard vessel. This is not an HOA preference issue. Interfering with him or the vessel may constitute a federal offense. I strongly advise you to rescind all fines and cease further harassment immediately. Brenda's face darkened into a shade of purple. Didn't know humans could achieve. This is a closed community matter, she sputtered. You have no authority here, ma'am. Lawson replied coolly. I have the full authority of the United States government. Your HOA rules do not and cannot supersede federal law. If you continue on this path, you'll learn